Alright students, so here's the second part of this question. Discuss whether policy of expenditure switching is more appropriate than the policy of expenditure dampening in an economy with a large balance of payments, current account deficits, and a high rate of inflation. So we have to explain the expenditure switching policy, the expenditure dampening policy, and how will it improve the current account deficit and high rate of inflation. So this question is quite technical to answer. So here it is, by the way, this is a 12 marks part, so we'll answer it accordingly. So as we have answered in detail about the expenditure dampening policy in part A, so you just need to give a brief introduction of what expenditure dampening policy is. So you can just say that expenditure dampening policy is related to expenditure reducing measures, which include the contractionary fiscal policy and contractionary monetary policy. And you'll just explain that government impose more taxes, they reduce their expenditure, the interest rate is high, and everything that we have written in part 1. You can just briefly explain there. Then you'll explain in detail about the expenditure switching policy. As we have studied in the class, that expenditure switching policy is basically when the government wants to switch the local consumers, the domestic consumers, from the imported products towards the local or domestic products in order to improve the current account deficit. So the basic tools to implement the expenditure switching policy, we have already discussed expenditure dampening policy in part A, so I'm assuming that you will write the answer of the first part of this part B according to part A, if you want to write it in detail. All right, so I'm just starting with the expenditure switching policy. So import restriction and control, this is the first tool that is this is used by the government, and this tool includes tariffs, quotas. Tariffs, you know that the custom duties, the taxes on the imported items, they are tariffs. Then quotas are you just restrict the quantity either through the percentage or through absolute quantity, that how much import can be done of a specific item in a specific country. Then we have procedures. Procedures means administrative procedures. You make your procedures so detailed, so restricted that people are discouraged to export things in your country. Hence, it also discourages the import in a specific economy. At the same time, government supports export through subsidies. So government subsidize or support the exporters of a country. For example, in Pakistan we have EPB, Export Promotion Bureau, which helps the exporters, and in few cases they subsidize them in order to enhance enhance the export of a country. Now, what will happen that if you're going to apply this tool, what is going to happen that it will help in improving current account deficit. Now, how this import restriction or control will help in reducing current account deficit or improving it? So since the imports will become expensive, why? Because of the tariffs, of the quotas, and all the procedures. So people will import less in Pakistan, and at the same time domestic goods will become more attractive comparatively, and their sales are going to go up. So what will happen that since your imports are going to be reduced, what will happen that your X minus M is going to improve, and as a result, X minus M is your net export, and as a result your current account will be improved. There will be improvement in your current account. All right, so at the same time, what will happen that there are two parts in the question. The first part is about how will we improve the current account deficit. The second part was how will we coop up with the inflation, the high rate of inflation. So what will happen that local goods initially will be cheap, because imported goods, they will have duties, they will have different kind of tariffs, and they will be expensive, so local products will be cheaper. But what will happen that the demand of the local goods will increase in the market. So as the demand will shift rightward, what will happen that the price is going to increase unless there will be a complementary increase in the supply of that specific good. So may not be be, and the other disadvantage is that the local goods are not be of the same quality as the imported goods, because every country does not have a comparative advantage. So we cannot exploit the comparative advantage properly if we are going to impose the import restriction or control. So what else can happen, that the retaliation from other countries can also happen, so they can also put restrictions on us. So it is not very effective for reducing inflation at one hand, and if you are putting all the tariffs, we have to make it sure that the other countries do not retaliate, because if you are a member of a trading bloc, if you are a member of some kind of agreement between different economies, then you have to be very careful about such policies. So you have to write that as well. Then we have the second tool of expenditure switching policy we have studied in the class was devaluation. We have studied this in detail as a separate topic, as well as we have discussed this when we were discussing the expenditure switching policy. So what is devaluation? Devaluation is the deliberate devaluation of your currency, which is only possible if you are following the fixed exchange rate system. So first of all, the prerequisite is that you follow the fixed exchange rate system. You deliberately devalue your currency. What happens, that imports become expensive because your currency is devalued, and therefore the lower imports are done, and at the same time your export become cheaper. So this is one of the methods where there will be no retaliation. Why? Because you're not imposing any kind of restrictions, you're just devaluating your own currency. So there will be higher exports. Why there will be higher exports? Because now your product will become competitive, at least on the basis of price, and people will start exporting from your country to their own country. So this will eventually improve the current account deficit, because there will be higher X, which is export, and lower M, which is import, which will eventually improve the current account deficit. Okay, this only works, devaluation only works if imports are elastic. So whatever you are importing, let's say there are different raw materials, there are different factors of production which are required in any case to produce a certain specific type of goods. So what will happen, that if you're going to devalue your currency, those components, those factors of productions will in any case be imported in your country, and they will become expensive. So rather than decreasing inflation, they'll start increasing inflation in your country. So that is a possibility. So your imports has to be elastic, else if they're not elastic, they're inelastic. Lower exchange rate will cause even higher inflation. At the same time, exports has to be elastic as well, because when the prices are going to drop down for the international market, the reaction in terms of change in demand should be good. So if they're not having a higher demand even after having a lower price from your country, then it is useless to devalue your currency. So this is the analysis of the two components of expenditure switching policy. I've already explained expenditure dampening policy in part 1. Now let's talk about the evaluation. Since it is a 12 marks question, we need to evaluate the answer to this question. So how will we evaluate? Listen carefully. Expenditure dampening policy, which is expenditure reducing policy as well, will reduce inflation. Of course, it will reduce inflation because the aggregate demand curve shift leftward. This will reduce the demand pull inflation. Improve current account. How it will improve current account? Because the overall expenditure is reducing, so the imports are also reducing, and imports will reduce. What will happen? That your net export will improve, and as a result your current account deficit will improve. But what will happen, that in expenditure dampening policy we have the monetary policy, which is contractionary monetary policy, which means we have a higher exchange rate. Now whenever you have a higher exchange rate, what happens, that internationally your country becomes attractive, so everyone start dumping money in your country in order to gain higher interest. So as a result, what will happen, that they will require your currency to put it in your bank. So the demand for your currency in international market is going to increase, and that will increase the exchange rate. So if the exchange rate has been increased due to the attractive interest rate of the expenditure dampening policy, the monetary policy and the expenditure dampening policy, so what will happen, that once your exchange rate goes up, your export become less competitive, imports become more attractive, and as a result your current account deficit will start worsening off. So you have to make it sure that you do not attract too much of foreign investment for the sake of interest. So this is the part of evaluation. The second part of evaluation is expenditure switching policy works mainly on the components of net export. As we have already discussed, that expenditure switching means when you're switching your domestic consumers from imported products towards the domestic products. So the main component of expenditure switching policy is the import and export. So they have to be elastic in order to gain the advantages from the expenditure switching policy. So if you're not having enough elasticity, and if you devalue your currency and you put tariffs and everything, so they might have a negative effect rather than having a positive effect. Lastly, which one is better? So there is no single answer to this part, that which one is a better one. We can write that it depends. It's my analysis that policy effectiveness depends on elasticity. First of all, if the elasticity is high, and devaluation and restriction and control is going to be a very powerful tool. But if there will be the elasticity is very low, these tools are useless. On the other hand, it depends on the contribution of each component in an economy. So let's say in many economies, the consumer expenditure, the business investment, and the government expenditure is the main concern. X minus M is not the main concern, let's suppose. So what will happen that in such cases, expenditure switching policy will not be very helpful, because expenditure switching policy is related to X minus M, net export. That is the main component for a expenditure switching policy. So in that case, expenditure dampening policy will be more helpful in order to reduce reduction and in order to fight current account deficit. But of course, it depends from one economy to another. So you can give another point, another evaluation, another conclusion, but you have to give a conclusion at the end. So if inshallah you are going to do this question accordingly, you will get somewhere around 11 to 12 marks in this question, inshallah. Thank you.